The recent sudden removal of Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov from the public eye is not a diplomatic illness or a temporary leave of absence. It is the clearest, most unambiguous signal of a political demotion from the highest level of Russian power, equivalent to a forced, if unofficial, resignation. This abrupt disappearance from the global and domestic stage confirms the severe internal stress and fracturing within Vladimir Putin's inner circle. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare, global affairs, and US domestic politics. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The evidence for this calculated disgrace is overwhelming and deliberate. A long-standing fixture of the Putin regime, Lavrov was conspicuously absent from several non-negotiable diplomatic and security events, confirming that he has been intentionally sidelined. Most critically, Lavrov was the only permanent member of the Security Council to miss the crucial meeting on November 5th, where Putin staged a high-stakes performance regarding the potential resumption of nuclear tests in response to the US. This was a moment of pure external signaling, yet the official face of Russian diplomacy was nowhere to be seen. The bureaucratic excuse offered that he was absent by consent was so thin and implausible that it only served to confirm the political nature of his exclusion. When the nation's leader stages a nuclear threat spectacle for an international audience, the foreign minister's absence is a declaration of his professional irrelevance. This pattern of exclusion continues across the global diplomatic stage. Lavrov, who for 2 decades was the reliable face of Russia at every major international forum, has been systematically purged from delegation lists. He was deliberately omitted as head of the Russian delegation to the upcoming G20 summit in Brazil and the ASEAN meetings. Instead, Putin appointed economic advisors and vice prime ministers to lead these delegations, effectively demoting the representation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from a political diplomatic function to a mere technical or economic one. Furthermore, his humiliation was visible even in bilateral contacts. Lavrov was notably absent during Putin's meeting with the president of Kazakhstan, a crucial ally whose stability is vital to the Kremlin. The foreign minister's presence at such an event is mandatory under established protocol. His exclusion here sends an unambiguous message to all security and political elites that his voice is no longer valued or trusted. This systematic removal from key events suggests a profound long-term loss of the leader's favor, turning the long-serving minister into a highly visible symbol of political disgrace.
We have established the undeniable fact of the foreign minister's public disgrace. Now we confront the immediate critical cause of this political execution: the catastrophic collapse of the planned summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in Budapest. This single diplomatic failure was so profound that it led directly to the imposition of crushing new sanctions by the US, resulting in the foreign minister being designated as the official scapegoat for the entire disaster. The immediate trigger for the foreign minister's fall was his disastrous communication with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The meeting was intended to be a vital preparatory step, a high-level check to ensure that the actual meeting between the two leaders would not repeat the humiliation of the previous failed Anchorage summit. The Kremlin desperately needed this summit to happen, viewing it as its last best chance to break diplomatic isolation and secure a favorable peace deal. However, the foreign minister effectively detonated the negotiations before they could even begin. He failed to translate Moscow's desire for a ceasefire into any form of acceptable diplomatic compromise. Instead, he presented the American side with a set of maximalist, utterly unacceptable ultimatums demanding the complete capitulation of Ukraine on Russian terms, full territorial concessions, and a guarantee of Kyiv's future neutrality. This intransigence, voiced so bluntly by the foreign minister, convinced Secretary Rubio that the Moscow position was hardened, unyielding, and fundamentally resistant to any good faith dialogue. Secretary Rubio immediately reported back to Donald Trump, confirming that a summit in Budapest would be a pointless waste of time because Russia was not genuinely interested in a resolution. The consequence was instantaneous and devastating for the Kremlin. Trump, having been personally provoked once before, immediately cancelled the planned meeting, signaling the complete failure of the diplomatic track. This failure was then compounded by an aggressive act of US retribution. Trump followed the cancellation with the imposition of the most severe sanctions of his new term, directly targeting the Russian energy heartland, Rosneft and Lukoil. The foreign minister's culpability in the eyes of the Kremlin is therefore absolute. He failed to read the political room, he failed to gauge the necessary degree of compromise required to placate Trump's need for a win, and he failed to protect the state's economic interests. Instead of securing a valuable diplomatic lifeline, he provoked a direct, costly confrontation, ensuring that he was the most convenient and expendable figure to bear the responsibility for the catastrophic collapse of the entire initiative. The political price for that failure was his public career.
We have analyzed the catastrophic failure of the Budapest summit and the resulting blame assigned to the foreign minister. The consequence of that failure is now manifesting as a systemic, humiliating downgrade of Russia's diplomatic presence on the global stage. The Kremlin is signaling to the world that its official Ministry of Foreign Affairs is being stripped of strategic importance and is being relegated to handling mere administrative functions. The clearest proof of this disgrace is the abrupt change in delegation leadership for major international forums. For 2 decades, the foreign minister was the undisputed face of Russia at gatherings like the G20 summit and the ASEAN meetings. Now, his name has been deliberately scratched from the attendance lists. Instead of the top diplomat, Putin appointed figures like the deputy head of the presidential administration, Maxim Oreshkin, and Vice Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk to head the delegations. This is more than a simple substitution. It is a profound reduction in status. Russia's presence at these crucial global summits is being demoted from a political diplomatic function focused on security and international norms to a primarily technical and economic one. The message is that the only thing Russia is willing to talk about on the global stage is business and money, not political resolution or security. This demotion proves that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is being actively sidelined from strategic decision-making. The foreign minister's failure to prevent the collapse of the Trump talks showed that the MID had become ineffective. This crisis immediately spurred Putin to activate an emergency countermeasure, the parallel diplomatic track. Instead of relying on the compromised official ministry, Putin dispatched Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, to the United States immediately after the Budapest fiasco. Dmitriev is an economist and a well-connected investment banker, not a career diplomat. His mission was a desperate attempt to salvage the crucial dialogue with Washington by bypassing the foreign ministry entirely. The use of this parallel track is the ultimate indictment of the foreign minister's influence. Dmitriev's failed mission, which saw him attempt to meet with top US officials who were deliberately absent, leaving him to negotiate with secondary contacts, still confirmed the Kremlin's core priority. The diplomatic solution, however flawed, must be driven by economic and financial figures, not by the discredited Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This confirms that the foreign minister has been reduced to a ceremonial figure, while the strategic dialogue with the West and the few remaining allies is handled by those who deal in investments and trade, the only currency Putin believes still holds value.
The consequence of this demotion is clear. The foreign minister is now functioning as a high-ranking bureaucrat, confined to routine consular issues and formal statements. His political usefulness has been consumed by his failure to manage the relationship with Donald Trump, guaranteeing that the public disgrace is merely the functional outcome of the Kremlin's necessary shift in strategy. The entire diplomatic vertical is being dismantled to reflect the new reality of Russia's political isolation.
We have analyzed the collapse of official diplomacy. Now, we confront the final, critical stage of the foreign minister's disgrace, his calculated appointment as the political scapegoat for the entire failure of the Ukraine strategy. This process of assigning blame is not about accountability. It is a vital mechanism used by the Kremlin to shield Putin from the consequences of his own disastrous policies, simultaneously intensifying the ruthless, silent struggle for power among the elite. The political logic behind this scapegoating is straightforward. The Tsar can never be wrong. The foreign minister's primary crime was not diplomatic ineptitude, but failing to achieve the impossible demands of the Kremlin. Putin's fundamental strategy to force the US to abandon Ukraine, lift sanctions, and accept Russian territorial claims was always designed to fail. When Secretary of State Marco Rubio correctly identified this uncompromising position and reported back to Donald Trump, the collapse of the summit became inevitable. The system then required a high-ranking, visible figure to absorb the failure. The foreign minister, having been the direct conduit for the disastrous message, was the most convenient target. By assigning him the blame, the Kremlin successfully masks the single most critical flaw, the porosity of Putin's own strategic thinking and his refusal to accept reality. The immediate consequence of this public humiliation is the dramatic escalation of the internal struggle for power. The disgrace of the foreign minister is not a singular event. It is an open invitation for his rivals and competitors to pounce. We are seeing a visible struggle between the official, sidelined institutions, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the rising parallel structures. The speed with which Putin replaced the foreign minister with economic advisors on international delegations proves that the vacuum is already being filled by those who offer the promise of financial rather than diplomatic solutions. This ruthless competition confirms the rule of the regime. Loyalty is merely a factor, but performance and results are the only things that guarantee survival. This vulnerability is being ruthlessly exploited by secondary actors. The immediate dispatch of emissaries like Kirill Dmitriev to the US is the physical evidence of this internal power struggle. Dmitriev, a financier, attempted to bypass the disgraced foreign ministry entirely, seeking to secure his own position as Putin's preferred channel to the West. The lesson learned by every member of the elite is corrosive. In the absence of success, the only way to advance is by actively campaigning against and destroying your rivals. The final, chilling conclusion is that the foreign minister's removal confirms the crisis of the Putin vertical. The high-level purges, whether they be the quiet sidelining of generals or the public disgrace of the nation's chief diplomat, are the mechanism by which the failing regime attempts to survive. But this process is ultimately self-defeating. It exposes the utter lack of cohesion and mutual trust among the leadership, guaranteeing that the system, already consumed by war and economic strain, remains structurally unstable and highly vulnerable to any future shock. The integrity of the state depends entirely on whether the pursuit of justice is as relentless as the Russian missile strikes.
We have analyzed the sequence of political events that led to the foreign minister's disgrace.
Now, we deliver the final, inescapable verdict. His removal is the logical and inevitable consequence of his own toxic, propaganda-driven legacy. The foreign minister did not merely lose a single negotiation. He became an agent of systemic poison, and his downfall confirms the deep structural crisis of the entire Putin vertical. The defining characteristic of the foreign minister's long tenure was his gradual but complete transformation from a respected, albeit problematic, diplomat into the Kremlin's most professional and unyielding propagandist. His primary function ceased to be negotiation and was replaced by the defense of the most indefensible acts of the regime. He became the global mouthpiece for every grotesque narrative emanating from Moscow, including the ludicrous claims of fighting Nazis and the relentless denial of Russian aggression. This transformation reached its lowest point with his infamous anti-Semitic remarks, the claim that Hitler had Jewish blood, a historically baseless and deeply offensive statement designed to deflect criticism from the Kremlin's actions. This single instance of ideological extremity earned him international condemnation and forced Putin into a humiliating apology, confirming that the minister was an active political liability. The paradox of the foreign minister's career is that his absolute loyalty to Putin ultimately became his greatest professional hazard. He strictly adhered to the rule of never speaking a word that deviated from the president's position, ensuring his survival through years of political turmoil. Yet, when the war strategy failed and the summit with Trump collapsed due to Putin's own intransigence, the foreign minister became the most convenient political shield. His persona was so thoroughly merged with the Kremlin's narrative that his failure was deemed the safest explanation for the disaster. His toxic reputation, which had made him a non grata figure on the world stage, became the perfect justification for his removal. The final disgrace is that his sidelining confirms the crisis of the entire Putin system. His removal is not an act of reform, it is a symptom of decay. It proves that the regime, already consumed by war and economic strain, is now turning on its own stalwarts in a desperate attempt to assign blame and maintain control. The foreign minister's fall is a visible assurance to the world that loyalty and long service offer no protection when results are absent and the survival of the core leadership is at stake. The foreign minister, once a pillar of stability, has been sacrificed to absorb the political cost of a disastrous, failing war.